All right. Um, this is Kevin Stoda, and I'm speaking to you from my room here in Kansas. Um, I just heard on the radio tonight that people around the country are listening to Martin Luther King's April 4th, 1967 speech um, about the war in Vietnam and how we can't ignore the fact that um, the arms race, the war in Vietnam at that time are intertwined with the spending priorities here in the United States. Um, he made that clear then. It was 52 years ago today, and 51 years ago today, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot. I'd like to retell that speech right now for you while I read from a writing where I adapt and appropriate some of his speech and some of his style. So that you can appreciate what he was talking about at that time. Let me, as though I'm coming up to the podium, give that speech. All right. If Martin Luther King Jr. gave this speech, it would be called If This Speech Were Given Today by MLK. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I need not pause to say how very delighted I am to be here tonight. I am very delighted to be expressing to you what is of great concern to all of us in America, uh, and we should be turning out in large numbers to consider these facts. I come to this house tonight because my conscience leaves me no other choice, and it should leave you no other choice. A time comes when silence is betrayal, and we've had silence for far too long. The time has come for us in relationship to the rest of the planet, as well as America, to ask that we renew the contract to our own peoples, which was offered for the first time in the 1960s to so many of America's marginalized people and to some others around the world. The truth of these words is beyond doubt, but the mission to which they call us is a most difficult one. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume this task of opposing their government's policy, especially in times of war. And we've been in permanent war for years here in America. However, the continuation of locating so many thousands of American troops, the greatest military power in the world, in 700 locations around the globe, continues to threaten our way of life here at home, as well as the world's way of life. Does the human spirit within us move without great difficulty against all the apathy? Yes, it can. Of conformist thought within one's own bosom and in the surrounding world. Moreover, when the issues at hand seem as perplexing as they often do, in the case of this dreadful conflict in Afghanistan uh, and other corners of the globe, the so-called war on terror in Iraq, or the wars to throw over governments, whether they were in Honduras recently, Libya, or in the plan to be one in Venezuela. We are always on the verge of being mesmerized by uncertainty. It's kind of like the shock doctrine, but we must move on. Some of us who have already long since begun to break the silence of the night that has been over America have found that the calling we have is to speak to our vocation of agony, and we must speak. Worse still, we can expect to be roasted in the nightly news and laughed at by so-called realists and so-called idealists and Christians all around us. We must speak with all of humanity. That is appropriate to our limited vision, but we must speak and we must rejoice as well. For surely this is and should be the first time in our nation history that a significant number of religious leaders have chosen to move beyond the prophesying of smooth patriotism to the high grounds of firm dissent based upon the mandates of conscience and the reading of history. Too many of you have forgotten history. Too many histories have been manipulated. And history has been denigrated in school. And like civil rights and other courses are not being offered to our students at the youngest age. We need to offer a better and a clearer vision of history. We must tell them the truth of war, the truth of peace. Perhaps a new spirit is rising among us. If it is, let us trace it to the movement that Martin Luther King Jr. made, that the people of America who supported him made, that God actually made. For we are deeply in need of a new way beyond the darkness that seems so close around us. Over the past some years, I have been moved to break the betrayal of my own silence and to speak from the burnings of my own heart, as I have called for radical departures from the destruction of Vietnam, Iraq, Pakistan, Yemen, Afghanistan, and many other places. And many persons have questioned me about the wisdom of my path, of our path. At the heart of their concerns, this gray has often loomed large and loud. Why are you speaking about the war, Dr. King? Why are you speaking about the war, Kevin Stoda? Why are you joining the voices of dissent? Why aren't you joining the voices of dissent? Peace and civil rights don't mix, they say. Aren't you hurting the cause of your people? They ask. No, it is so obvious that in a country that spends trillions every year on past wars, present wars, and future wars, that we have to say, aren't the people hurting enough? Interestingly, daily, the same question is already being asked of our president. Just a few years ago, Barack Obama and Donald Trump. I, however, do not turn a deaf ear unto my conscience as so many of my fellow Americans do. Many of the president's aides and staff members, such as Hillary Clinton then and the other clowns Trump has now, show a deaf ear to the sheer number of victims of war and war-making victims in the U.S. and abroad. And when I hear them, though I often understand the source of their concern, I am nevertheless, greatly saddened, for such a question or questions mean that the inquirers have not really known me. Indeed, their questions and deaf silence suggest that they do not know the world in which they live. In the light of such tragic misunderstanding, I deem it of signal importance to try to state clearly, and I address concisely, why I believe that the path from Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, the Church of Montgomery, Alabama, the churches that have been blown up recently, or the synagogues that have been destroyed, or the Palestinian refugee camps that have been blown up. It leads to the need for sanctuary, call to sanctuary from all this tonight and forever. I come to this platform tonight to make a passionate plea to my beloved nation. This speech is not addressed to Hanoi, it's not addressed to the Taliban, not addressed to Al Qaeda, nor the National Liberation Front here, the government there. It is not addressed to China or Russia or to Venezuela. It's not addressed to the richest men and the largest movers or shakers of the planet, nor is it an attempt to overlook the ambiguity of the total situation and the need for a collective solution to the tragedy of Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, you name it. Neither is it an attempt to make North Vietnam or any terrorist we see now, or inhumane war makers anywhere, now and in the present or the past, nor the National Liberation Front here or there, nor to overlook the role they must play in the successful resolution of any problem. However, we all have justifiable reasons to be suspicious of the good faith of the United States, especially in the case of Israel and several other parts of the world right now. Life and history give eloquent testimony to the fact that conflicts are never resolved without trustful give and take on both sides. Tonight, however, I wish to speak with Hanoi, Kabul, war makers, human rights mongers, military contractors, subcontractors, and all the people in line from the richest military contractors and gun making corporations in the world. I'm also, most importantly, talking to my fellow Americans. Since I'm a preacher, maybe I'm not a preacher, but my MLK is, I suppose that it is not surprising that I have 7 major reasons for bringing all this up. And Afghanistan into the field of my moral vision. There it is, the outset of very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Afghanistan and the rest of the world we see today, and the struggles we see. The reason I'm bringing up Afghanistan is because America has been in this war since 2001, and we see no way out but by sitting down with people and finally concluding the matter. And we need to do the same in other parts of the world. And we need to stop wasting resources on war machinery. $2 trillion a year is just too much. We could be doing so much in America. We could be a light on the hill. A few years ago, there was a shining moment in our struggle. It seemed as if there was a real promise of hope for the poor, both black and white, Chicano, even Asians, through the poverty programs that were offered in the 1960s and some of those that were offered later. There were experiments, hopes, new beginnings. Do you recall the end of the Cold War? Do you remember the talk of a real peace dividend being reinvested in every community in America back in 1990? Then came the buildup in Iraq, Afghanistan, Kuwait, Yemen, and elsewhere. I watched these programs or projects we call America or the American dream broken and eviscerated as if it were some idle political plaything of a society gone mad on war. And I know that America would never invest the necessary fund or energies in rehabilitation of its poor so long as adventures like Vietnam, Lebanon, Nicaragua, Salvador, Honduras, Grenada, Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Yemen continue to draw men and skills and money like some demonic destructive suction tube. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war and wars as an enemy of the poor and to attack them as such. Perhaps a more tragic recognition of reality took place when it became clear to me that the wars were doing far more than devastating the hopes of the poor at home. They were sending their sons and their brothers and their sisters and their husbands and their wives to fight and to die in extraordinarily high proportions relative to the rest of the population in the United States, at least in terms of injury nowadays. We see so many hurt people coming back from these wars that families will have to take care of for years because the government can and won't. They need communities around them. They need better communities than what we have now. We need to spend money, time, resources, love on communities, not fighting each other. We were taking the black young men who had been crippled by our society and send them off to wars 8,000 or more miles away to guaranteed liberties in Southeast Asia or in Southwest Georgia or wherever we were at war. So we have been repeatedly faced with the cruel ironies of watching Negro and white boys on TV as they kill and die together for a nation that has been unable to seat them together in the same schools. Yes, we still have divided schools. We even have divided Sunday mornings. So we watch them in brutal solidarity, burning the huts of a poor village or bombing some people with their drones or actually coming in and helping um, Saudi's princes do terrible deeds in places like Yemen. But we realize that they would hardly live on the same block, these same people in Chicago. I could not be silent, and we cannot be silent in the face of such cruel manipulation of the poor. Our third reason moves to an even deeper level of awareness, for it grows out of our experience in the ghettos of North America over the last 43 years, especially in the northern states, especially in the last 40 some summers. As I have walked around and seen the desperate and rejected and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. Around the world, I've seen and offered people the deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? What about Iraq? What about Afghanistan? What about Syria? What about Lebanon? What about the war on terror? What about, they asked if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its own problems, to bring about the changes it wants. Their questions hit home to me, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyors of violence in the world, people like Donald Trump and his friends or his supporters, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of those girls, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands of trembling under violence, I cannot be silent. We cannot be silent. First gave this speech some 52 years ago, and the violent and growth in spending on military waste, on previous wars, on victims of wars, on our own troops, uh, our own citizens, and the commitment to violence to solve these problems has continued, almost unabated the entire time. There was only that short period between about 1976 and the early 1980s that the US didn't get involved in war. And we need to go back to that. We need to not be so threatening as in the build up to the last days of the Carter administration, but he did pretty good on his first few years. We need to follow that example and bring this country around. We must invest in our society, in our people, in our education. We must loosen the debts and the chains um, that we have built around the poorest and middle class in recent years. And people say, aren't you a civil rights leader? And thereby mean to exclude me from the movement for peace here and around the world. In 1957, when a group of us formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, we chose as our motto to save the soul of America. That's where we stand. In 53 plus years, we have not stopped fighting for the soul of America. We have not lost faith, and we want those who have lost faith to regain their faith. We were convinced in 1957 that we could not limit our vision to the certain rights for Black people, but instead affirmed the conviction that America would never be free or safe from itself until the descendants of its slaves were loosened completely from the shackles they were still wearing. In a way, we were agreeing with Langston Hughes that the Black Bard of Harlem, as he had written, "Oh, yes, I say it plain, America never was America to me. And yet, I swear this oath, America will be." That's the way we looked at things. There was a river, and we are the river. We are in the river, America, to save the soul of America. Now it should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the presence of war. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Afghanistan, Iraq, endless wars, Syria, I don't know, this next debacle in Venezuela or with Cuba or in Africa, some poor African land. Please, it is this war or that war or these wars that can never be saved so long as they destroy the hopes of men the world over. They can never be won. So it is that those of us who are yet determined that America will be are led down the path of protest and dissent, working for the health of our land. As if the weight of such a commitment to the life and health of America were not enough, another burden of responsibility was placed upon us in 1964. And I cannot forget that Nobel Peace Prize, because it was hung around my neck as I was commissioned with it that year. I was given a commission to work harder than ever. National allegiances and should take you beyond national allegiances. This allegiance, greater than national allegiance, continues, though, to be an allegiance to the soul of America, the soul of America. And even if such a great allegiance were not present, I would yet have to live with the meaning of my commitment to the ministry of Jesus Christ. To me, the relationship of this ministry to the making of peace is so obvious that I sometimes marvel at those Christian leaders who ask me why I'm speaking about war. Could it be that they do not know that the good news was meant for all men, for communists, capitalism, terrorists, for all children, and for all colors, for all revolutionaries, for all victims, Muslim, Arab, Latino, Asian, white, gray, pink, purple, and conservative? Have they forgotten that my ministry, our ministry, is in obedience to the one who loved his enemies so fully that he died for them? What then can I say to the Viet Cong, to the Taliban, to Al Qaeda, or to Castro, or to Mao, or ministers here or there? Can I threaten them with death, or must I not share with them my life? Finally, as I try to explain to you and for you and for myself the road that leads from Montgomery to this place, to the future that will be in America, I would have offered all that was most valuable if I simply said that I must be true to my convictions, that I share with all men this calling to be a son of the living God. Beyond the calling of race or nation or creed is this vocationship of brotherhood, sisterhood, familyhood, because I believe that the Father, the Lord, is deeply concerned, especially for his suffering and the helpless outcast children. That's why we came here tonight. This, I believe, to be the privilege and the burden of all of us who deem ourselves bound by allegiance and loyalties here or there, which are broader and deeper than nationalism, and which go beyond our nation's self-defined goals and positions, many of them mistaken. So many of them mistaken. We are not called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless. Yes, we are. We're called to speak for the weak, the meek, the voiceless, the victims of our nation, for those who call enemies here and there, and they call these people enemies. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers and sisters. Please go beyond your understanding of your own historical documents and get down to the fact of the relationship of your Lord and what he promises for you, promises for the kingdom, promises for this world. This is a message of Christianity. It is a message of humanists. It is a message contained in the Quran, in the teachings of Buddha, you name it, is at the crux of what makes man different than the beast or animals under heaven to a great degree. And as I ponder the madness of Vietnam, Afghanistan, the madness of Iraq, the madness of Syria, the madness of Libya, the madness of going to war and knocking our brothers out of their countries in Latin America and forcing them to come up to the States and become refugees, I ask you to search within yourself, as I search within myself, for ways to understand and respond in compassion. My mind goes constantly to the people of that now somewhat forgotten peninsula. I speak now not of the soldiers of each side, not of the ideologies of the Liberation Front here or there, not of the junta in Saigon, not of the junta in Washington, but simply of the people who have been living under the curse of war for almost, I don't know, more than 6 decades. I think of them too, those in Afghanistan living already under so many 4 or 5 decades of war, because it is clear to me that there will be no meaningful solution until some attempt is made to know them and hear their broken cries. They must see Americans as strange liberators, just like the Vietnamese people did. They proclaimed their own independence in 1954 and in 1945, rather, after a combined French and Japanese occupation and before the Communist Revolution in China. Those people in Vietnam, recall, were led by Ho Chi Minh. Even though they quoted the American Declaration of Independence in their own document of freedom, we refuse to recognize them. How many other people in the world are searching their own freedoms, looking to build their own world, or wanting to build a better world than the one we've tried to foist upon them? Indeed, we decide to support France in its conquest of Vietnam. We supported Europe in its conquest of Libya. Our government felt then and now that the Vietnamese people were not ready for independence. Feel now that the people here and there aren't ready for independence. So we leave our troops there. 700 locations around the globe. How much more? How long? How long? And we again fell victim to the deadly Western arrogance time and again that has poisoned the international atmosphere since the 16th century, when Spanish galleons first went around the world and built the global empire, the first global empire in history. Similarly, it took us over, I don't know, 5 or so many years to allow the people of Iraq to have some self-governments. And what's come of that? What kind of government did we leave them? What could we have done better? Should we have not been there at all? Of course, we shouldn't have been there at all, trying to build their own country. Meanwhile, this very month, the current presidential administration has continued to increase U.S. military commitment to whatever form of government is anywhere. However, our insatiable preoccupations with controlling others around the globe, their destiny marches onwards. How long? This has taken place even though left and rightist voices in America have spoken out against this nonsense again and again. Yes, both sides of the aisle, progressives and conservatives, have called out again and again to say this nonsense must not go on. Our soldiers will come back by the thousand, hundreds of thousands, probably millions by now. And I ask the same thing. Why again and again? With these types of tragic decisions, we have rejected a revolutionary government seeking self-determination in Vietnam, and it wasn't established by China. It established by the Vietnamese. Here, there, we had the same thing in Venezuela and in Honduras and Haiti, and each time we intervened, but by clearly ingenious indigenous forces asking to make their own way, not communists necessarily. And even if they were, why shouldn't they be given a go? They can fall on their own. No, we need not put up with Pol Pots or other regimes like that. But we must, as a whole, be committed to letting these 700 locations around the globe follow their own path. It's an important need in our lives and in the lives of those all around the world. With the kind of patriarchal decision-making process that America has had for far too long, America has once again lodged itself indefinitely in ground wars in Asia since 2001, and there's really no end in sight there. And it looks like we're doing the same in Africa, maybe Latin America. I don't know, we'll maybe on the Korean Peninsula before long. For 9 years following 1945, we denied the people of Vietnam the right of independence. And then after that, when the French left, we continued to deny them that. Before the end of the war, we were meeting 80% of the French war cost in 1954, even before the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu. So it's like money sucking us here, and we follow. Money sucking us here, we follow. We encouraged them, the people there in Vietnam, with our huge financial and military supplies to continue the war even after they lost it. And by here, we're referring to a few elites against the popular will. But soon we would be paying almost the full cost of the tragic attempt at recolonization. This war basically destroyed the Great Society of the 1960s, and that was followed by self-destruction, by failure to follow through and to have continued empathy for the world and awareness of the world, and our hiding of our own eyes at our own sins throughout the 70s, 80s, 90s, and all the way up till now. Similarly, the once vaunted North American Treaty Alliance is being propped up by U.S. military dollars, equipment, and lives in Afghanistan, and at what extreme cost? Militarily, socially, financially, spiritually, America? Did that get us any peace with Russia, or has that just made things worse? After the French were defeated in Vietnam, it looked as if independence and land reform would come again in Vietnam through the Geneva Agreement. But instead, there came the United States determined that Ho Chi Minh should not unify the temporarily divided nation, and the peasants watched again as we supported one of the most vicious modern dictators, our chosen man, Premier Diem. The peasants watched and cringed as Diem ruthlessly rooted out all the opposition, supported their extortionist landlords, and refused even to discuss reunification with the North. It sounds like dictators we've supported all over the world, and we continue to support this very day, like those in the Saudi Arabia. The peasants and Israel. The peasants watched as all of this was presided over by the United States in their influence, and then by increasing numbers of U.S. troops in the 1960s, who came to help quell the insurgency that Diem's method had aroused. When Diem was overthrown, they may have been happy, but the long line of military dictators seemed to offer no real change. And that's been the case in many of the countries, such as Saudi Arabia, such as many kingdoms in the Middle East, such as in Africa, such in South America, especially in terms of their need for land and peace. We have been buying off the richest and helping the richest and never really saying, let the people work on their own problems and we will help them with development. No, we're always throwing the money at it and showing that we're so smart by our plans. But didn't they? You get it? By the end of the Vietnam War, this idea of planning wars and carrying them out was considered nonsense. And then George um, Bush Jr., George W. Bush, and his Cheney buddy, they decided to make it a permanent situation. They just ignored the history of Vietnam and covered everything up. And to a great degree, the Pentagon supported it, covering up the history. They enjoyed making the big money after the um, terror war of 2011 one continued on for so long. Of course, it wasn't our fault, they said. It was those bad people who bombed the World Trade Center. When are we going to be responsible? I was not surprised the World Trade Center was bombed. I'd been anticipating in my heart for many years blowback would happen. When you have troops in 700 locations, what can you expect? There will be blowback. And it's not very hard to hit a target in America, and you just need God to give it permission. Naturally, this is only one part of the whole story. In the case of Afghanistan, is a long-term moral, financial quagmire. We have found first a Republican administration, now a Democratic, and again a Republican, committed to showing that multiple bad decisions will make things right, and the whole world will love or respect that in the end, in the form of America. That is a dream. That is not reality on the ground. America. The fact is that according to both the DoD, Department of Defense, and those who aren't dead, I don't know, they could be costing you more. Annually, the numbers of dead have been rising for all of the past 20 years. Meanwhile, the schools around us don't have teachers. Likewise, elderly, poor, and needy go without medicine, and others without homes in the USA, as well as in Afghanistan and Yemen and other countries, as war continues on. Now as occurred in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, 90s. The only change came from America as we increased our troop commitments in support of governments which were singularly corrupt, inept, and without popular support. All the while, the people read out leaflets and received the regular promises of peace and democracy and land reform. Remember, we were supposed to get land reform after the Civil War. Never got it. Now they languish around our bombs and consider us not their fellow Afghanis or their fellow others, but they think maybe we're the real enemy. They move sadly and apathetically as we herd them off the land of their fathers here and there into concentration camps. By we, I'm talking about the money that we throw into Israel when we do that with the camps. We've got prison-like characters to most of these locations in what's called Palestinian parts of Israel today. Social needs are rarely met. in Israel for these people, and in the United States, neither. Um, People know they must move on or be destroyed by our bombs around the world. What are we being destroyed by? Are we being destroyed by bombs that we send to other places? We have bombs that cost maybe $2 million and we've used them. So they go, primarily women and children and the aged. They watch as we poison their water, as we kill millions of acres of their crops or their livelihood or their buildings. They must sweep as the bulldozers roar through their area and destroy their precious trees or their homes. Again, I'm thinking of Israel there. They wander into the hospitals at times with at least 20 casualties from American firepowers to every one. That means over 20 casualties for every American who's killed. It could be 100 casualties in some cases, or thousands casualties to one American dying. Taliban inflicted injury too on us that we have to pay for. So far, we have killed a million of them since 2001. But we've also killed many children and the aged. They wander into the towns and see thousands of children, homeless, without clothes, running in packs on the streets like animals in some places. They see the children and women degraded by our soldiers as they beg for food in some places. They see the children selling their sisters to our soldiers, soliciting for their mothers, even if these are only lies or half-truth propaganda by Al Qaeda types. It should cause us to think and pray. What do the peasants think as we ally ourselves with the landlords, the warlords, and the chiefdoms on the take? And as we refuse to put any action into our many words concerning land and political reform, what do you think as we test out our latest weapons on them? You know, like we did in Afghanistan with that big bomb, just as the Germans tested out new medicine and new tortures in the concentration camps of Europe. Where are the roots of the independent Afghanistan, the independent Iraq, the independent Libya? Is it among these voiceless ones we have helped to destroy? Their two most cherished institutions, the family and the village. We have destroyed their land and their crops. Think about this as we support Israel. And we don't have to say that the Israelis are any better than some of the other governments in the Middle East to do this. We have, or any worse, we have cooperated in the crushing of peasants of Kabul and Yemen and elsewhere. We have corrupted their older leaders, their women and their children, and we've killed their men. Now there's little left to build on in some places, save bitterness. We knew this before there was Taliban. We knew this before because the 1960s told us this. So we have corrupted children, women, and men. And in some cases, we have fortified hamlets again, like in Palestine. Do you remember those in Vietnam, fortified hamlets? Not totally unlike the current green zone in Baghdad that we built, or the $500 million embassy plan for Afghanistan, or the ones we're planning across Latin America, as Americans still are impoverished at home. In Kansas City, Kansas, we have 25% of our children go to bed hungry. The peasants may well wonder if we plan to build our new Afghanistan or our new Iraq, our new Libya, our new Europe, our new America, our new Japan, our new Philippines. We must speak for them and raise the question they cannot raise. These too are our brothers and sisters. We need to speak for them. At this point, I should make it clear that while I have tried in these last few minutes to give a voice to the voiceless in Vietnam, voiceless in Iraq, voiceless in Afghanistan, voiceless in Libya, voiceless in Lebanon, voices in the Middle East and elsewhere, and to understand the arguments of those who are called enemy, I am deeply concerned about our own troops too. They're as anything else. For it occurs to me that what we are submitting them to, girls, boys of our own family, these long entrenched Asian and North African and maybe soon to be South African and East Asian and other conflicts, it is not simply the brutalizing process that these Americans as soldiers go on into and experience in any war where our enemies face each other and seek to destroy each other. We are and have been adding cynicism to the process of death all this time. For they must know after a short period of time, our young people, our older people who come back from war, that none of the things we claim to be fighting for are really involved. Before long, they must know that their government has sent them into a struggle among the Afghan tribes and families, as well as among the dozens of other stands from Kurdistan to Pakistan and on to Tajikistan. The more sophisticated among our forces surely realize that we are on the side of the wealthy, the powerful, and the secure, while we create a hell for the poor. Somehow this madness must cease. We must stop now. I speak as a child of God and a brother to the suffering of the poor, all of Asia, throughout Asia. I speak of those whose land is being laid waste, whose homes are being destroyed, whose culture is being subverted. I speak for the poor of America who are paying the double or the triple or the quadruple price of smashed hopes at home and smashed regional and local economy and dealt death and corruption in all corners of the world from the Middle East to Afghanistan to Latin America, and where the children run to the United States for help and refuge. I speak as a citizen of the world, for the world as it stands aghast at the path we have taken. I speak as one who loves America to the leaders of our nation. The great initiative in this war is ours. The initiative to stop it must be ours in all these wars. This is the message of the greatest Buddhist leader of Vietnam at the time I wrote this speech originally. This is the truth of the well-studied and the practiced man of whatever faith. Recently, one of them wrote these words, and I quote, this is a Buddhist. Each day the war goes on, the hatred increases in the hearts of the Asian war victims. That could go for the Rohingya in Burma today, or outside of Burma today, and in the hearts of those of humanitarian instincts. And America has to be standing on side of humanitarian instincts, not forcing even our friends to become our enemies. It is curious that Americans who calculate so carefully on the possibility of military victory time and again do not realize that in the process they are incurring deep psychological and political defeat. This is why so many of us cry for America. But we're not here to cry, we're here to build. The image of America will never again be the image of revolution, freedom, and democracy, but the image will be violence and militarism. Unless we turn from this process that we've been in since World War II ended. If we continue, there will be no doubt in my mind and in the mind of the world that we have no honorable intentions in Afghanistan and in Israel, wherever, even as it had become long ago that true that the U.S. leadership had no interest in the masses of those living in Vietnam. If we do not stop our war against the people of Afghanistan and elsewhere, the world will be left with no other alternative than to see America as some horrible, clumsy, and deadly game player. And our NATO powers, our partners, have decided to play along for now, but will they play along in the future? Especially as China throws its money around and weight around. The world now demands a maturity of America that we may not be able to achieve. I'll say it again. The world now demands a maturity of America that we may not be able to achieve, but we must try. The world demands that we admit that we have been wrong from the beginning of our adventures, like in Afghanistan and Vietnam, and that we have been detrimental to the life of the Vietnamese, the Iraqi, the Afghans, the Venezuelan, and other peoples. The situation is one in which we must be ready to turn sharply from our present ways in order to atone for our sins and errors in Vietnam and the Middle East, in Latin America and East Asia and Central Africa, just like the Belgian, leadership was responsible. Of course, they have their own soul searching to do. I would like to suggest 3 concrete things that our government and its citizens should do immediately to begin the long and difficult process of extricating ourselves from our nightmarish conflicts. First, support the peace Yurga process, which include the lawyer Yurga calls for several things: to act and comply with the teaching of Islam and respect the aspiration of the people of Afghanistan for lasting peace and ending war on fratricide. Through understanding and negotiations, the Peace and Reconciliation Initiative shall be for and among Afghans only and does not include in any way foreign extremist elements and international terrorist networks. No peace effort should question the achievements made so far or their legal values, and should not lead to a new crisis in the country. And this is something we need to have determined early in the war in Syria, but we haven't. We didn't. The same in Iraq. As a gesture of goodwill, to take immediate and solid action in freeing from various prisons those detained based on inaccurate information or unsubstantiated allegations. We need to stop be making enemies. We need to end these Guantanamo Bay love affairs. The government, in agreement with the international community, should take serious action in getting the names of those in opposition removed from the consolidated blacklist, for example, in Afghanistan. The government and international forces should guarantee protection and safety for those who join the peace process, and that could be good in Israel too, and should provide for a safe return of those in any armed opposition. Again, there are so many corners of the world we should be demanding that too, not just Afghanistan. The disaffected and armed opposition should renounce violence, of course, and all other activities that result in killing our people and destroying infrastructure. And they should disassociate themselves from Al Qaeda and other terrorist groups. The international community should expedite the process of equipping, training, and strengthening Afghan national security forces and others so they can acquire the capabilities to take responsibility for providing security of their own country and people. The representatives want and urge, should be urging a long-term international commitment so Afghanistan does not become again a playground for regional conflicts, especially China coming in and Tajikistan and some other neighbors, and that external interferences should be and can be averted, and thus space for stronger regional cooperation can be provided. We need to call on the international community to support the peace process led by the government of Afghanistan, as well as the women of Afghanistan. The government, with the public support, should take every step to deliver good government, make sure appointments are made on the basis of merit, and fight administrative and moral corruption, as well as legal property possession at both national and provincial levels. This will boost public confidence in the government in Afghanistan and the chances for a successful peace process. The people of Afghanistan demand a just peace. Yes, a just peace, which can guarantee the rights of all citizens, including women and children. For the purpose of social justice, the Jirga urges and should urge laws to be applied equally to all citizens of the country. A high peace council or commission should be created to follow up on the recommendation made by the Jirga and the peace process. The commission shall form a special committee to handle the issues related to release and return to normal life of prisoners. This is a model we can be applying as we try to get out of the 700 places in the world where we have our troops. We need to have this approach. We're not just running away. We're trying to leave with a sense of security and really with peace and long-term being looked into. The government and international forces should guarantee protection and safety for those who join the peace processes, whether it's in Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, or wherever, and they should provide for the safe return of those in armed opposition, as I noted before. The West and Muslim world, including Pakistan, should support this effort in Afghanistan because it is a good step for regional and global peace. In short, peace negotiations should start in Saudi Arabia or elsewhere where Taliban elements can participate. We've already seen that in Qatar, and we'd like to see it followed through now. But these sort of things need to be done in all corners of the world where we're pulling out. NATO, for example, must plan negotiations and help in the negotiations much more as the U.S. is trying to extricate itself out of regional wars and troubles over the next few years. Until now, the U.S. plan has been lacking many of these elements and only now is trying to use them. America should not wait for successful military operations, but act immediately in the framework of all these NATO double strategies of power reconciliations that include both soft and hard factors. Number two, we need to follow Europe's lead and seek a more nonviolent path of resource and manpower usage all over the world, not just in Afghanistan. This means seeking an Afghani rather than a firepower solution in most cases. A local power of control, not us trying to settle it always with firepower. We need to find out in Latin America who is really interested in peace, who's really interested in improving the situation of the people, and back them, not the richest, not the wealthiest, and not the easiest, which seems to be the status quo for much of American policy of the last 70 some plus years, which just leaves us as a colonial power. Number three, America must take a more spiritual and a spiritually uniting path to solve the Afghanistan dilemma and other dilemmas around the world spiritually. As many good theologians, such as Susan Brooks and Cecil Waite, and spiritual people elsewhere have noted concerning war in general, no war is a necessary. No war is a necessity. The only thing that is actually necessary is greater peace and stability in the world, and there are many paths to get there. Force is becoming more and more a last resort because in today's world, the use of force just seems to lead to the use of more force. One of the greatest moral hazards of our time is that wars don't seem to end. There is the creeping concept of the long war, the idea that military engagement can have no real end because modern war has no end. And it is true that many regions of the world are not exactly at war, at least by the old standards of war, and they are by no means at peace. That's the big problem. They are by no means at peace. If by peace you mean human security from organized violence by insurgents. Older thinking on war and peace can still be useful here. Just war theory, the tradition of moral reasoning on war and peace, fashioned by two Christian saints long ago, asks some useful questions of those who would engage in war now. One very useful question is whether there can be a good outcome for war. I mean, the invasion of Iraq, we had so little chance of a good outcome, unless maybe we went knocked out Saddam Hussein and left the country. That I don't know if that would have even worked. Uh, there was so little good outcome. I mean, America tainted its whole image by getting it. I don't know if there's any way we could have had a good outcome. It, and for this reason, hundreds of millions of Americans were out in the streets protesting the invasion. We need real democracy in America. It's supposed to be there, and we are supposed to be able to know and see it when there is a real need for war. If not, there should be no war. Even now, Americans from the highest level of government to the ordinary citizens need to keep asking and striving to answer the question of what good outcome means for today's conflicts anywhere. It may very well not include the primary use of military force, but instead include involving regional stakeholders through diplomacy, through international development, through other getting even more stakeholders involved, such as women in conflict resolution process and the economic empowerment of ordinary citizens. More people need to be involved in the ongoing conflict solution situation. People need a stake in the stability of their own society or they won't own the peace. This is very much the case in Afghanistan. Second, it's necessary to know what peace looks like and how it comes about. A prudent exit strategy will come about because the concrete elements for peace are known and pursued in a practical and coordinated fashion. For example, this will have to include the realization that indigenous forces like Taliban, or at least some members of the Taliban, must get involved in solving the Afghani problem. There are now relatively few Al Qaeda members in Afghanistan, so this is why it's a perfect time to follow through. Um, it was absolutely fascinating and a modest source for hope that the U.S. began to exit from Afghanistan in a prudent way some time ago. Under signs of success today in Afghanistan, the immunization of children, the increase of children attending schools from 1 million under the Taliban to 7 million today, those are things. But in the end, what destruction. Thus, when General Petraeus later affirmed his commitment to civil-military partnership in the question and answer sessions I've heard about, or we heard about before he left, there was a ring of truth in it. While recent peace yoga had many problems, there was some hope. And this is the kind of on-the-ground peacemaking that those who plan for an exit from Afghanistan, in other words, must consider seriously. We need a just peace approach everywhere, not just war theory, but just peace approach. As it needs to be the fourth paradigm on thinking about peace and war in today's world. It must be beyond pacifism. Just war and crusades? No, just peace has it as its goal, defining not an abstract concept of peace, but the roadmap for how peace is actually created. Think about it. What kind of America do you want after all these wars? What would you like America to be doing? The other people in other lands need to be thinking this through and not letting the wealthiest get in the way, not the most powerful. Get educated. Help them get educated. We can help the world get educated if we stop hanging our students getting out of college with $100,000 in debt. We got to get rid of the things that hang people before they get started. Some hang up people before they get started. Some people believe, myself included, that just peace is a part of an emergent doctrine that needs to be accepted not just in some facets of a corner of an administration, but in the heart of every member in that administration. It's unclear how we're going to make this bigger, but it needs to grow in the hearts of all Americans first, and then the leaders have to follow. This is the case for exiting sooner rather than later in many cases around the world. I ask you to think this through. This is Kevin Stoda. I'm completing my recalling of Martin Luther King's Riverside speech using references to today to carry out that speech now. I've adapted everything.